Hello everyone, Aimer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time I'm looking at Season 7, Episode 2, which is called 2000. So this episode starts with a fellow who we learn is Joseph Collins going to a condemned house on the wrong side of the tracks. He finds a briefcase full of cash in a secret compartment and the phone rings. The European man on the other end of the call confirms details of a pickup in 2 days. Collins confirms that the merchandise is where previously discussed. The police have the line tapped and do the conventional law enforcement routine that seems to be prevalent nowadays of getting the IMF involved. Jim uses spy speak to get his instructions from a photographer. The mission: Collins is a nuclear physicist, and he stole 50 kilograms of plutonium. His buyer is someone named Haig, who is unknown to authorities. The IMF must recover the plutonium before it leaves the U.S. We have an apartment scene featuring a seated Casey due to Linda DeJordy's pregnancy and Barney's new facial hair, along with the usual array of tricks and gadgets. The IMF set up outside Collins' apartment building where Collins hears a news bulletin about a massive flare-up of the Cold War due to tensions in the Middle East on his IMF-rigged radio. A fellow near the building notices the parked cars containing Jim and Willie and another officer, calls Collins from a payphone, warning him about the surveillance. The man says he's a lawyer named Max Bander and represents someone in the U.S. who is willing to double Collins' existing offer for the plutonium. Collins asks for an hour to think about it and prepares to dash away, but finds Willie at his door with a warrant for murder, and they take him to their car and thence to the station. Bander makes a note of the license plate as they drive away and calls his pal Lieutenant Sager at the station to try and find out whatever information he can about what's going on. Collins calls his lawyer, but the call is intercepted by Casey, who says she'll try to locate him. Sager watches as Willie takes Collins to a part of the station that's being renovated with a two-way mirror and the continued bulletins about increasing hostilities. Sager finds that there's no record of Collins' arrest in the files and that the license plate doesn't actually belong to a police car, and he's denied access to the restricted area. Willie opens a window, which is actually an IMF projection of a sunny day outside, and starts to question Collins, who smartly says he won't say anything without his lawyer present. Sager feeds a microphone through a vent and listens to what's going on in the room, including the bulletin about missiles incoming towards Los Angeles, air raid sirens, and a nuclear strike. A nuclear blast is shown on the screen, and Collins is knocked out with a ring. Finally, Sager hears Jim give instructions to tell the people in Brixton that everything is happening as planned. Brixton turns out to be mostly a building that was heavily damaged by an earthquake some time ago, and the IMF arrives there in short order with several men staging the area, and Collins is brought into the building. Sager plays his recording for Bander, and he heads towards Brixton as well. Collins awakes to find himself in a room with scruffy old men in an assembly line packing biscuits in cans. Looking in the mirror, he sees that he himself is aged and demands answers about what's happened. Soldiers grab him as he gets agitated, and Officer Jim enters the room, ordering Collins to be put in a cell because of his refusal to work. The cell contains Barney, and Collins sees old men being shackled into chairs in the opposite cell, in what turns out to be a gas chamber. Barney tells Collins that from the numbers on his shirt, he's a Class 9, those who were right near Ground Zero. He himself is Class 6, as a prisoner of the war that started in 1972, and the year is now 2000. An air raid siren is heard, and the entire building starts bustling with soldiers moving around, the ground and roof shaking, and explosions heard nearby. Bander and two other men confusedly watch through binoculars and listen through a parabolic microphone, trying to figure out what they're doing. After the tremors subside, Collins and Barney find that the door lock has come undone and take the opportunity to get out. Collins takes a gun from a fallen soldier, demanding that Barney help him, but Barney just laughs and tells Collins that the number on his collar indicates that he is scheduled for execution in 2 days, his 65th birthday, just like all Class 9s. Nevertheless, Barney leads him out of the building for what it's worth, and they run in from the IMF soldiers who chase them. They get back into the building through a door while Bander informs his client about what's happening. They come to Jim's command center where there's a discussion about war strategy. Soldiers find the two and bring them into the room. Collins says he can help them, and the civilian leader in the room says he'll listen, as Jim notices that Collins' makeup is starting to wear off. Collins says he can get them the 50 kilos of refined plutonium that he buried near Los Angeles, and he knows how to turn it into a bomb. Jim takes out a map and asks Collins to show them where it is, and he begins to describe the location, but then hesitates, saying there's no guarantee he won't be killed anyway. He's assured that if he has the abilities he claims, his life will be spared. Collins reveals the hiding place as Bander overhears as well, and Collins is taken back to his cell while the information is verified. It turns out that Haig and his men are already at the location and have dug up the container. Bander and his men find them, and there's a gunfight, but Bander's crew gets the worst of it. The IMF men arrive and surprise Haig's crew, denying them their prize. After a while, Collins finds that his door is unlocked, and suddenly the building is abandoned and quiet. Collins exits the building, discovering the makeup covering only some of his face now, and breaks into maniacal laughter as a police car arrives to take him away. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of a C-. Starting with the good, or maybe let's just start from a kind of objective informational approach here. From a pure information and objective standpoint, this episode is obviously derivative of the season 6 episode Invasion, which is itself derivative of the season 1 episode Operation Rogosh. I think it can be argued that it's more like Rogosh than it is Invasion, although it really does, your mileage may vary on that. The new twist, of course, is that there is a third group involved. In the previous ones, the IMF was just basically looking for information that would lead them to, the actual physical objects that they're looking for. But there was, they had, they had their mark, and then they had another, person or entity that was basically looking to take out the mark before he could reveal the information. In this case, it's quite the opposite. We've got a third group that is involved that doesn't want to take out Joe Collins. They actually want to keep him alive so he can lead them or tell them where the MacGuffin, the plutonium, is in this case. So from that standpoint, you could say, well, we just had, this episode Invasion. Yeah, we did. So this is a new twist on it. I feel that this is more along the lines of Operation Rogosh, and that is a little bit forgivable, given that, it's 6 seasons later, it's 6 years later, so not a lot of the viewers, even if they had seen Operation Rogosh back in the day, would have remembered a lot of the details about it. They're not doing what we're doing, which is, watching it on the internet or through streaming or whatever. There weren't even VCRs then. So some might have remembered, but probably not a lot of them. So it's forgivable that they would kind of have a remake of this. That said, there's not a lot new here. This episode draws from a lot of the tropes that we've seen in many, many episodes, sometimes over and over again. It uses the fantastic voyage where somebody's gone way into the future. Or, Encore, another one. And that one, they went way into the past, using the same kind of makeup technique. In Encore, obviously, they made somebody younger. Here, they made somebody older, but it's the same idea. It also draws on episodes where we have a big store. We have a building that, is suitable for a certain purpose. And, the IMF sets it up with, personnel and, other items that basically, further the mission and convince the mark that they are in a situation or in a place that they did not expect. And, hey, this is a new reality that you will have to deal with. Starting with the good, I like Vic Morrow as Joseph Collins. I think his performance was quite good. There's a lot of other guest stars, but with that, the screen time gets split up with a lot of them. We have the fellow who plays Max Bander and the guy who plays Haig, Ivor Berry, who's actually a very frequent guest star, but they don't get a whole lot of time. So they're just kind of there along for the ride as part of the story. However, I will say that I liked the way that the writers and producers put the wild card into this episode. It's not too contrived. It's actually sensible. The way that, Bander kind of appears and, is able to, communicate with Joseph Collins. At first, I wondered about why the IMF didn't have a tap on Collins's phone. Because then they would have known that Bander was calling him. But I guess it's forgivable because the IMF believed that they already had the information that they needed. They had the tape of the call that he had with Haig. He had made his arrangements. He was preparing to get out of the country. And obviously the whole plan was for them to take him down to the station as soon as he kind of left his apartment for the day. So I get that. It's okay. Also, it's sensible that a guy like Bander, in the position that he's in, would have a buddy at the police station. It seemed a little bit weird to me that Lieutenant Saker, the guy at the police station, the officer, was able to, get a microphone down to wherever Collins was being held. But, that was part of the story. I think that's a little bit forgivable. At least, it pushed the story forward. So that wasn't so bad. Also, something interesting. I always like to look at some of the scientific stuff and check it for accuracy where it's applicable. I was a little bit concerned about the idea of, okay, we're talking about plutonium, obviously a very radioactive substance, and in this case we're talking about refined plutonium, plutonium-239, which happens to be the perfect material to make a nuclear bomb. I said to myself, okay, wait a minute, you can detect plutonium, especially at that level, with Geiger counters or any, similar tools that will detect radioactivity. So I looked it up a little bit, and apparently, if you bury plutonium properly in proper, steel containers or, some other similar kind of container, it actually is rather difficult to detect over long distances. So a little bit, kudos to the writers for that. That actually turns out to be accurate. However, that said, it doesn't look like Joseph Collins buried it very deep, as it was intended to be found. Now, that's not a problem for the purposes of the actual happenings in this episode, in the time frame that things actually happen. There is a time pressure for the IMF. They have to get this container, find this container, find out where it is, and get the container, within a certain time frame before Haig gets it and, dashes off to Europe with it. So obviously the IMF couldn't go all around Southern California with Geiger counters and go and look for it. As I mentioned, Collins wouldn't have buried it very deep because he didn't want to make it too difficult for Haig and his guys to get it out. My bigger concern, though, is that, let's say for sake of argument, it's the year 2000, as Joe Collins thinks it is. Over 28 years, certainly that container would have been found, right? There would have been some way that somebody would have looked for it or whatever. Technology would have been developed in order to find such things, to see, obviously in the situation that, the contrived situation that the IMF has made here, the government would have gone through extraordinary lengths to try and find anything that they could use for the war. So they would have spared no expense, I would imagine, to try and find this 50 kilograms of plutonium that ended up being stolen. So I'm actually kind of surprised that Collins wouldn't have figured out, well, why should I bother? You know, they would have found it by now. That said, obviously he was in a very desperate situation and wanted to save it and was looking to save his life. So again, your mileage may vary a little bit on that. Collins as an antagonist, it's interesting because I thought about, you know, do I say that he's a good antagonist? He's not really a villain, well, you know, depending on how you want to characterize him. But in terms of being an antagonist, he kind of doesn't fall into the usual categories. Is he a lame schmuck? Is he unengaging? Anything like that? No, not really. He's just a guy who, you know, had committed a theft and was just trying to get away with it for money. So, you know, I don't know. Like those, it's hard to categorize him in any of those ways. In terms of, you know, the kisses of death that I usually try to look at when I'm gauging villains or antagonists. So again, I can really only qualify this on the basis of how entertaining Vic Morrow as Joe Collins is, and he's entertaining enough for me that I wouldn't really say that he's certainly not bad. Was he great? No, but he was good. He was okay as an antagonist here. This one is mostly about the story. And certainly, you know, this, as I said, Vic Morrow is good. Was he as good as Kevin McCarthy in Invasion? I'd say no. He wasn't. So, and again, it has not a reflection on Vic Morrow, the actor, just the character and the script. Moving on to what I didn't like, the bad. This one harkens back to me about the complaints that I had about a lot of the episodes from the first few seasons. This is another one where the IMF is able to go through a ridiculous amount of expense in terms of material and personnel in a very short amount of time. You know, again, the whole problem of having unlimited resources in order to make this hugely elaborate con. You know, the important, obviously it's very, very important. So having that level of resources to bear can make some sense. What's problematic to me is that this is one where the IMF has unlimited resources, but they don't have the other part that usually goes along with that, which is perfect information. Now, I'm not really sure whether that's good or bad. Maybe it just is what it is. I complained when the IMF had perfect information because, you know, how would they know that? I complained about that in many of the early reviews. So I'm a little bit torn about that. I don't know whether to call it bad. I don't know. I don't think I want to call it good. I guess I just have to call that it is what it is. But I'm never in favor of episodes where the IMF show blatantly that they're using unlimited resources to achieve a goal. I think back to the obvious episodes to compare it to, Invasion and Operation Rogosh. In Invasion, the IMF did put together, you know, a repertory or a bunch of guys to create a small army, or at least, you know, a battalion, let's say. They had a group of like 40, 50 soldiers in order to convince, you know, their antagonist in that episode that, you know, certain things had happened. And I remember commenting in Operation Rogosh that it was completely the opposite of that. They had a small repertory, just, you know, a few people, and they were able to pull off the con with a minimal amount of people and effort, because in that one the antagonist, the villain, actually drove the action, and he and Rogosh basically cause the plot to move forward. Here, the IMF kind of have to take their mark through the steps. It's a different plot. It's a different story, of course. So that's okay. It's not that the story doesn't make sense. It does make sense, but it just means that it's not quite as much of an elaborate story as that one was, and I don't feel that it's quite up to the level that Invasion was either. So that's why I think I'll stick with my grade of C- for this one. It's entertaining enough. I don't know how much rewatch value you can get out of it, but it was okay. Certainly it was better than Break, which was the previous episode. And I think I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you all, as always, for watching. Please like this review video. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and please leave your comments. Thank you again, and I will see you next time.